Welcome back to the leading edge of integrative mental health. I'm your host, Lisa Dale Miller. Please review and subscribe to the Groundless Ground podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, YouTube, radio.com, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and of course find out more at groundlessground.com. I'm ready to go. How about you? Loch Kelly's new book, The Way of Effortless Mindfulness, is a practice manual for living a fully embodied, open-hearted life. Loch insists the goal of effortless mindfulness is not to escape or transcend, but to recognize and embody wakeful, pure awareness, which is ever present in the midst of the full range of human experience. To help listeners directly know effortless mindfulness, Loch offers a few mindful glimpse practices, along with in-depth structural descriptions of what differentiates effortless mindfulness from mainstream mindfulness, or what he calls deliberate mindfulness. The Kagyu school of Tibetan Buddhism says nature of mind or pure awareness is hard to recognize precisely because it is so close, so subtle, so simple, and so good. Our dialogue cuts through the esoteric clouds of confusion which often pervade instructions on how to recognize this extraordinary yet so completely ordinary mind. Loch describes his unique framework of the 8 types of awareness, the 5 foundations of effortless mindfulness, and what he calls no self, self. And because we are both clinicians, Loch and I also discuss how effortless mindfulness skills can be delivered in clinical contexts to alleviate cognitive, affective, and physical distress. Loch Kelly, I'm so glad we have this time together.
Me too. It's so great to have a chance to talk with you, Lisa.
You've written a phenomenal book on effortless mindfulness. It's so clear, and that's going to make our conversation, I think, really easy, actually, for me. I like people to get to know the people I talk to.
There's a long, medium, and the short version, but I'll jump into the middle of it and just say, when you look back on your history, you start to see more clearly some ways I was led along by synchronicities and fortunate meetings and things like that. But I would have to say, probably when I was a freshman in college, my father developed brain cancer. So I was kind of a bumbling student who was interested in philosophy and psychology and things like that. But certainly I was kind of thrown into something that my peers weren't yet ready to talk about. I had already done some meditation experience. I had done types of shifting of awareness. And actually the one story where they came together was about halfway through that year after my father had cancer. Then he passed away after getting better, and then he died. A few months later, coming out of the library at college, I felt like I was just kind of overwhelmed with grief. I heard a voice within me that said, I don't know if you can take this any longer. At that time, my awareness kind of looked as if it was a voice within my head or above my head or something, but my awareness opened up and stepped out into the night sky and then continued to open into this beautiful, starry, clear winter evening. And it wasn't just the physical space, but somehow there was a connection to some sense of an awareness or support or intelligence that was greater than me and was essentially kind of holding me and was at the essence of who I was. And I just had this shift. I started to cry and laugh at the same time and feel like a burden had been lifted, a great relief and support. And, after that, it was a process. Then I was able to continue to go through grieving more easily. But just that immediate shift and discovery of something from a bind and an emotional kind of contracted, overwhelmed state into its opposite. And from there, it didn't feel like that was denied. It was actually just a greater capacity to be with that.
I'm so glad that you told this particular story. One, because it's such a common story throughout human history in pretty much almost every tradition you can think of, including all of quote unquote indigenous primitive cultures where there is a sense that the human system gets to a point of almost complete roadblock, and that is the opening for this deeper connection. I think this is at the heart of everything I want us to talk about, is parallel path that I perceive of science and the deeper reality. Knowing the way we modern humans know, using all the ways that we know, and then this deeper underlying knowing that's always been a part of humanness, which you've just described so incredibly beautifully.
Yes. And I didn't really go to think of it as a certain religious orientation. I felt something was just real, kind of part of the human being lineage. I've trained and traveled and studied with many great masters from different traditions. I feel like we're all just trying to find the same common language for this which we all have within us and around us and which we're connected to.
Yes, and that's why I feel it's parallel and not contrary.
Even the spiritual traditions say that this kind of direct realization is only for advanced students who are dry wood, and you wouldn't teach this to wet wood. And yet, what you and I have found, and what I've been finding from other colleagues, is actually people with the most complex trauma can access this immediately, and it's actually what they need, and it's what heals. So it's a dimension that isn't something that needs to be developed like a concert violinist, as if it's a specialty of an Olympic athlete of meditation, that
Exactly.
it literally is essentially who we are. And it's just this unique bind and this processing of information the way we do that we haven't been able to find it easily to just shift or drop or open or let go or discover, uncover. So these movements and these figure ground shift, that has been my greatest interest. How do we discover that which is already here?
We may get a little abstract today for some people. However, as that might occur, I want people to actually know you're somebody who spent years establishing homeless shelters and community lunch programs at a mental health clinic in Brooklyn, and worked extensively with families recovering from the 9/11 trauma. And I'm saying this because I want people to know that this is not something you are offering and saying, well, you can apply this if you have trauma. I'm imagining you literally
Yeah.
have put together this way of teaching about effortless mindfulness from years of offering these skills to people with really severe trauma.
Yes, from early on, I could tell it was available, and I would do it playfully. I tried to present it at one of my clinical meetings at an outpatient mental health clinic in Brooklyn, and was met with, "What is he talking about? What is he doing in there?" And then I realized, okay, keep doing it, but don't always say exactly what you're doing. And now we have some great research. Toward the end of this book, The Way of Effortless Mindfulness, I talk about collaborating with Dick Schwartz and internal family systems, and there's been some great research around working with complex trauma using this dimension of self as the primary healing dimension. What is effective is often the subtlest, invisible, but palpable and accessible, even though it's not thought-based and always describable.
Or understandable. The Way of Effortless Mindfulness is a book that lays out practice of mindfulness that is a little different than I think what most people think of when they think of as mindfulness, especially mindfulness practices from Theravada Buddhism, mindfulness practices from MBSR. We don't have to describe those practices except to say that in your book, the word you use to describe mainstream mindfulness practice, you use the word deliberate mindfulness.
Yeah.
So I thought maybe you could just say something very quick about why you came up with that term
I was going to graduate school in comparative psychology, spirituality, and clinical social work. Immediately, I could see that even psychology for me was not just individualistic, it was biopsychosocial, environmental, relational. So there's a connection to social justice and outreach and community and to the psychology and to the mindfulness or the meditation spirituality. I went to Sri Lanka because a Jesuit priest who had done a PhD in Buddhism and a PhD in music, as Jesuit priests tend to do, but he, by the end, was crying about the social justice work he was doing, as well as the Buddhism and music, and just talking about Sri Lanka and what was happening. So I just went and said, I want to study with him. And they said, well, we have programs here and here, but not there. And I said, well, I don't, that's where I want to go. And so I ended up in Sri Lanka working with him, with people there in the community, then went up and did 5-day retreats, 10 and 21-day retreats in the Theravada insight meditation Vipassana tradition, and then would come down to the university and study and then work with the communities. And, really enjoyed the Vipassana insight meditation, got benefit from it, and then ended up in Nepal and had been told about a teacher, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, traveled up to sit in his small hut house, gave a 15-minute talk, and then gave this 3-minute shift of awareness, pointing out instruction. And within a minute, I felt the same way as at the end of a long retreat. But it was different because my eyes were open. I felt related to everyone. I was interactive. It lasted in a way that I could talk and walk immediately. I didn't feel withdrawn or shut down. I felt very open, connected. I felt like my mind wasn't just in my head, that the world was the mind. We were all interconnected.
I had a similar experience the first time I received pointing out from Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche's son, Dzogchen Rinpoche.
Uh-huh.
Here it is, and my eyes are open. It feels like I've come home.
Yes.
I want to read a quote from your book. There's so many great ones, but I thought this was a great way to describe effortless mindfulness. You write, the goal of effortless mindfulness is not to escape or transcend, but to live a fully intimate human life. The immediate goal of effortless mindfulness is to transition into the new, upgraded operating system, embodied and open-hearted, and has greater capacity to be with our full human experience.
That's the kind of result. And that's kind of what most people want to know is why do it? It is more embodied. It's not a detached witness, nor is it a kind of a concentrated, calm state. But it does have this dimension of transcendent. In other words, kind of boundless, groundless ground, openness to the subtlest dimension of our consciousness that becomes primary, empty and awake, and then includes everything, and then is what everything is made of. So that's the embodiment. The embodiment is not just like mindful yoga, like you're aware of your body. It literally feels like your body is everybody. It's everywhere and here, interconnected, and you're feeling your body and knowing from within rather than from a separate point of view. So it's a feeling of almost, like you say, coming home.
Exactly. So when you wrote your book, I imagine you must have spent a lot of time working very hard to create a way to describe something which has been described as indescribable.
That's right. Yes, I wrote a book about something that you can't write about. That was my goal, and I've achieved it, and now I don't know what to make of it. So
I feel like this book is the upgraded operating system from the first book.
This is more the guidebook.
Practice manual, I think.
Yeah.
So the way you start the practice manual is with something you call mindful glimpses. You say it's similar to a Zen koan, a simple inquiry that can't be solved through logic. It takes you out of conceptual mind and what you call the small self. Maybe you could do one of the many mindful glimpses that are in this book right now.
Sure. And maybe we'll do one now and we'll do one later after we've talked about a few other things. So this one starts by just feeling the current condition of organizing the small sense of self if you notice as you're listening to me now that you start to feel, where are you hearing from? Where are you trying to understand what I'm saying from? So not what you're understanding, but literally like the felt sense of location. For most of us, it feels like where we're located is behind our eyes, in the middle of our head, in an area looking out of our eyes. And so that habit of thought, going to emotion, going to sensation, creates a kind of loop and creates what we come to describe as I think, therefore I am. So it's this feeling of a thinker and a knower and an I in this area. And because it's this thought-based loop, it's not really who we are. It's just more of an ego function than an identity. But it's trying to solve the problem of identity. It's trying to get something to feel happy. And the word in Buddhism for suffering, dukkha, is often translated as perpetual dissatisfaction. So this describes this habit of searching first, solving a problem of identity. And if this problem solver could just relax and we were able to just feel or look with our awareness to feel who or what is here, we might discover that there's this other awareness-based knowing being obscured by that and pattern of the mind. So this is a simple inquiry that you could listen to now, and it'll take a minute or so to see what it feels like. And then you could try it again later. So the inquiry is very simple. It's just asking, what's here now when there's no problem to solve? Just letting the problem solver relax, not orienting by thought. Let your awareness feel who or what is here when there's no problem to solve. So then it's just a matter of familiarizing this, being curious about, is this a meditation state, or could this be the ground of who you are, to which other states would now be welcome to arise? Different parts, different emotions, different thoughts, but without having to get on the train of thought, to remain in this spacious, pervasive, open, clear, awareness-based, open-hearted presence.
Well, that was wonderful. So when you offered this to people either at your trainings, or sometimes I assume you do this one-on-one with your own patients, maybe this is the first experience, one of the ways you introduce just resting in awareness itself. What is the usual feedback that you get?
Usually people will say, so what's here now when there's no problem to solve? It's relief, openness, freedom, joy, clarity, sense of well-being, everything's okay, a potential to know, alert, ease of being. The amazing thing is it literally takes less than a minute. So it shows it's this close. People walking off the street, literally coming to a first time, 8 out of 10 people will get it. So that by itself is pretty remarkable. They'll usually, describe different facet of the diamond, but they'll feel the shift. They'll feel that there is another dimension. They'll be curious about what it is. If some other part of them comes in that says, what's going on? I feel a little agitated. Then the next level is to kind of encourage them. That's normal. Just see whether you can be with that. And then that starts to point toward this no self that can be with an emotion or a doubting mind or a judging part that comes up, embrace or be with anything as it arises.
This experience that you're pointing at right now is something in your book you call awake awareness.
The first dimension of that non-thought-based alertness, that there's thought-based knowing. In Theravada and Zen, they'll deconstruct and they'll go into not knowing or don't know mind, which can be kind of a blankness or a gap. So this awake awareness is trying to point immediately from the first operating system, thought-based knowing, I think, therefore I am, to let go or shift into this spaciousness and then notice that that space is awake.
It has some capacity to know, doesn't have thingness,
Yes.
but it does have an innate luminous quality to it. It can be the container through which any phenomenal experience could be known.
Awake could mean clear or alert or the potential to know, or it could be peace of mind or silence, silent knowing, stillness, presence, that a baby would have a kind of awake awareness prior to concepts and thoughts, just because it's aliveness. So there's some alertness, responsiveness. But then we develop conceptual thought and self-awareness, and then develop a kind of ego function, and then develop a kind of ego identity, parts that are identified with the separate body, mind, self. And now we're going to upgrade to this alert awareness. I'm using awake awareness as just that first being able to just be aware, and you could respond or could know, but you're not orienting to thought.
Right.
But from there, you could be in a flow state or be in the zone. Csikszentmihalyi, who's a researcher from Chicago, talked about people who are optimally functioning are describing this same primary way of knowing, which is non-thought-based, non-ego-centered, interconnected, and optimally able to perform tasks without going to thought. It's not zoned out, it's not spaced out, it's not only for sitting in a cave or on a cushion, but it is this first major distinction, which is not in the Western psychological map. I've just talked to a researcher, Judd Brewer, and he and I are hoping to actually look for some of the markers and distinguish groups that can learn to do this, because from here, you can literally effortlessly focus on an object or a task without being distracted, because you're not focusing from your small moving mind. So you're not only aware of the awake awareness, you're aware from the awake awareness. Some people will go right into being aware from thought-based knowing, separate sense of self, dualistic consciousness, to resting as awareness, but then not just resting as it, it's being it and seeing from it.
So this is when effortless mindfulness gets problematic for people. I love the fact that you put this in your book. Why something that's always there and is not special at all, and actually doesn't take any special training really to be aware of. The Kagyu give 4 reasons why people just don't naturally recognize it. It's so close you can't see it. It's so subtle you can't understand it. It's so simple you can't believe it. And it's so good you can't accept it.
This is the whole secret gift, this first awake awareness, Rigpa, they call it Turiya, the Tao. I should probably make 4 reasons why it's easy, because it's so learnable, it's so freeing.
But also, I think we humans, we like to make something out of everything. That's the problem. You can't make anything out of this because it isn't a thing. There's no entity called nature of mind. A capacity to recognize experience. I'm very suspect when people say flow is the same as Rigpa. This isn't something you get into. It's always there. We are either cognizant of it or not.
Yeah, the or not is not in flow. The flow is the secular version. It doesn't have all the compassion, the open-hearted awareness dimension, but it is a non-thought-based awareness that's functioning highly. When awake awareness is primary, I'm optimally functioning. Seamlessly, I'm able to feel non-worried, non-fear, and non-shame, and talk and not know what I'm about to say, but say something that I kind of think, well, that wasn't so bad. It's almost like a continuous intuition.
I'm so glad we're having this conversation. This is not me playing devil's advocate at all. Because honestly, trying to describe all this is almost impossible. We keep going back and forth between 2 separate things. One is performative, and the other one is innate. Mostly when people talk about flow states, they're, for instance, talking about athletes who experience flow. These are people for whom the skill, the task that they are doing professionally, they've practiced for so long and their body has complete memory of the thing. They don't have to think through the activity. So they're able to just relax, concept, and
Yeah.
perform.
But what's an awake Buddha walking around is performative. So, in other words, awake Buddha who does compassionate activity in the world, walking around, talking, giving teachings, a living awake Buddha, rather than what mostly is talked about is just recognize rest as Rigpa on a cushion somewhere, and then, oh, it's so hard once I get off the cushion. It has to become the new operating system for living an awakened life.
I agree with you. That requires familiarity, familiarization, which is the actual definition of dhyana meditation,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
familiarization. And yet, the kind of familiarization that you're teaching in this wonderful book is different than the familiarization they teach in what you call deliberate mindfulness.
Yes.
Deliberate mindfulness instruction manual tells you how to do familiarization. You do a fabulous job of describing how to familiarize yourself with something that is nothing. So one of the places you do this very skillfully in your book is the chapter on the 5 foundations of effortless mindfulness. And most people are aware of the 4 foundations of deliberate mindfulness. So I thought maybe you could give people a little bit of a sense of the 5 foundations of effortless mindfulness.
It's literally different systems of focusing from different levels of mind. And the focus of the 4 foundations of mindfulness is focusing on the contents of consciousness, body and sensations, mindfulness of feelings, of pleasure or displeasure, mindfulness of mind, whether grasping or aversion, and mindfulness of mental phenomena like thoughts, images, and other mind objects. By looking at the contents almost like you've shifted from eyeglasses to a microscope, I'm not the thought, feeling, or sensation that I was bound to or identified with. Those are changing, they're arising and passing. So now the feeling is you've set yourself up as this witness separate from the contents of consciousness. In the 5 foundations of effortless mindfulness, the first curiosity is, okay, now we've looked at the contents, let's see who's looking. What's the context? You can't actually use the attentional part of your mind that looks at your breath. If you turn that around, you won't see awareness. You won't feel it because that attentional system, just like thought, can't know it, can't feel it. I discovered after kind of reverse engineering all this is that it is only local awareness, which is inherent within our mind, that can look through the meditator and open to this spacious, boundless, timeless, awake, pure awareness that's already always been aware, this awake awareness. Local awareness, aware of awake awareness.
Local awareness meaning the conceptual, attentional capacity to know, thinking mind, yes?
No, only awareness can know awareness. So attention and your small mind can't know it. How could you be aware of awareness if you're not aware of awareness, since only awareness can be aware? And then I've lost most people there. When you're aware from Rigpa or awake awareness, and you focus on something like your knee, what is the difference in feeling your knee when you're aware from awareness-based knowing?
In an effort to help people understand something that is non-conceptual, it's important to talk about direct non-conceptual experience.
Yes.
If I just direct my attentional capacity, the flashlight of my attention to my knee, I can think my knee as a concept. That's mostly what people do. I could do deliberate mindfulness. So I could direct my attention into the viscera of my knee and I could actually feel from within. So I'm doing that right now. I can feel the feeling of my knee. If then I allow myself to be aware of the background of awareness, which is just the capacity to know, my knee could be one of myriad numbers of phenomena that happen to be occurring and coming into my awareness. I don't need to use a concept because the experience is already there.
So that's resting as awareness. And now you're in the awake field of pure awareness. Then there's two moves from here. Is one is just resting there now. If you then notice the first movement of energy, thought, feeling, or sensation, and you feel like it's coming and going through the sky, like a bird or a cloud, then you've gone backwards to meditational state. So the non-dual move to embodiment is to realize that from the pure awareness that's not aware of anything in particular, that the first thing that arises is made of awareness. The first energy, thought, movement in Tibetan Buddhism is called nailing practice. But you basically watch for the first movement and you just curiously, oh, is that something other going through, or is that made of awareness? And all of a sudden you start to move from what I call the second foundation, which is awareness aware of itself, to awareness from awareness energy, which is the non-dual Buddhist move that emptiness, appearance are not two, that awareness and movement are not two. So now everything can come into focus without losing the groundless ground, without losing the awake awareness as the foundation, because everything's just dancing as awareness. And now when you're aware from this field of awareness, when I ask, where are you aware from? People say, well, I'm aware from everywhere. It's literally like the field is everywhere. There's just a lighting up in the field. So local awareness just localizes in your knee, then it could localize in the lamp, then it could localize in the person across from you, and you're interconnected, which is really what the word emptiness ultimately means. So the feeling or direct perception of emptiness is there's no separate sense of a separate thing, that everything's interdependent. So you literally feel this feeling of being interconnected, which is emptiness appearance. And then if you wait to see what it's like when you go back to an identified consciousness, it feels like there's a kind of contraction back from this open field that's interconnected to this small separate sense of self. And yet awareness is within it and it's made of awareness. Can you now move the local awareness, which is inherent within thinking, and just have it move and open and return home, which is in Buddhism sometimes called child awareness, child Rigpa returns to mother Rigpa. Now, I'm not talking to you, the mind, and I'm not talking to you, the efforter, or you, the doer. I'm talking to the awareness that you are, that's already awake, that is identified and can simply unhook or disidentify or shift or return, open out or go deep within until it discovers the field of awake awareness that's alive and interconnected. And that is the premise of that third movement of local awareness returning to spacious awareness. It's like what Tulku Urgan says, that his practice is every day. He said, all I do is simply, whether I'm walking, talking, sitting, moving, I just simply return my awareness to Rigpa and then go back to what I'm doing. So what do you mean, return your awareness to Rigpa? Where is it when it's not in Rigpa? It must be identified or attached. Turn, so then I just said disidentify, unhook, separate out awareness and return it home, and then it includes everything. People can learn how to do this little skill, which is at the center of this seemingly esoteric type of pointing out.
It's a skill set for attention.
If you look at the attentional system, it actually is off. When you balance the default mode network and you're in this awareness that's embodied, your attentional system is low, but you're able to focus because you're using this other system. That's what Judd and I are hoping to discover. But this is one of the key differences, is distinguishing awareness from attention and distinguishing awareness from thought-based knowing.
So when I use the word attention now, I don't mean attending to phenomena. What I mean is an inherent intelligence in awareness itself.
And what you're saying is pretty much what most people trying to explain, awakened consciousness use attention. And one of the things in both my books spend a lot of time with is creating a new vocabulary that's just as clear, but really distinguishes like 8 types of awareness. When you're attending one-pointed attention to your breath, that's what I call attention. And literally what it does is it represses one dimension of the default mode network of your brain by turning the task mode network on. So you get calm, but but you can't function from there. So this other type of awareness, local awareness, spacious awareness, is an alternative.
When you laid out the 8 types of awareness, attention was the first one. Then every one of the next 7 all have the word awareness. It appeared to me as though there's a hierarchy starting from most contained
Yeah.
in a sense of self, and then moving out away from a small contained sense of self.
And then coming back and back. So they move out to pure awareness, but pure awareness or awake awareness is halfway there. Awareness energy becomes non-dual, awareness appearance, emptiness appearance, and then ground of being becomes no self, which is the sense of being open, spacious, and yet related to your body and other people's personhood and aliveness. So the ground remains awareness-based, but now it includes ultimate reality and relative reality.
Normally, when people use the term no self, they are referring to a realization that arises from deliberate mindfulness. So all this occurrence that I am experiencing is not of me. So my sense when I was reading your book is that you had basically turned that on its head and come up with a completely different sense of what no self means. So different that you use the word self as part of your definition. No self, self.
We walk around feeling like we have a small separate sense of self, that we're either our body mind or we're looking from this thought-based self that has autobiographical self, location of felt sense of self. And then if you go by deliberate mindfulness, you see that that self-center that's made of thinking and feeling and sensation is not the self, but you've established without talking about it. So then where are you aware from? I'm aware, what do you mean? I have no self. Well, who's talking? Well, I mean, there's no self here. There's nobody here named Loch. There's just talking happening. Oh, really? What if a car comes along? Who jumps out of the way? And basically what happens is you develop a mindful witness. You didn't see that you had a self, and now all of a sudden you see, oh, that's not the self, but now you have another invisible looker that's looking from a detached witness point of view, or self-awareness, which can label thoughts, feelings, and sensations, looking from a mindful meditator, or it's looking from a big sky mind that has still a dualistic view. All those levels are a viewer with things that come and go. So then let's go and do these 5 foundations of effortless mindfulness. Let's start to look back, turn awareness around, which is one of the key pointers. And what it does is it opens to a boundless, timeless, pure awareness dimension, which some people think is super advanced, but again, probably 8 out of 10 people within a weekend workshop will clearly get that. And the feeling is you really only need to unplug from the conditioning beyond mind and beyond emotional body and energetic body to this awake awareness, and then recognize it. And then the realization, awareness is aware of itself by itself without your help. Effortlessly aware, and now I'm aware from there becomes the beginning of this non-dual awareness. Feels like thoughts are made of awareness, energy is made of awareness, feelings are made of awareness, emptiness, appearance, emptiness, bliss, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So that move becomes so important to have that realization that starts to feel more embodied. And that's where this intelligence starts to become more primary as kind of the heart mind or open-hearted awareness. It's almost like you've dropped from head to heart, and there's this new sense of bodhicitta or self. The no self goes further than the mindfulness no self. The meditator is like, wait a minute, not only is the thoughts not the self, the meditator is not the self, nor is the big sky mind the self. Now there's really no self. So now we're in Buddha nature, true nature. Those are the words that are used for, I'm just awake. Who are you? Are you an angel? Are you a saint? No, I'm awake. Being, awakeness, appearing as a human being that has a relative form is this no self. So why not call it self? When patients are asked, are you aware of this part that wants to hurt yourself? And they say, yes. Are you aware that there's a part that doesn't want to hurt yourself? What do you mean? Well, just look. Oh, yeah. Well, who's aware of those two parts? And then they'll open and they'll go, well, I am. I said, what's that like? Well, it's vast and loving and open. So this feeling of just me, it's like Zen's ordinary mind. The ocean is the self. The human body Loch is the local representative that is connected. And so that's me. It's a way to get the awake consciousness into kind of ordinary language rather than using a lot of, words that are abstract, like true nature or Buddha nature.
What I'm hearing you say is the reason to use the word self, and you use it with a big S, you're basically stating an Atman.
It's not the Atman because the Atman's kind of like a soul. And this is really like a Tao.
That's not a self.
It's not a self like the small self.
Well, to me, it's not a self in any way. One of the things that I think you're pointing at, and I felt this in your book over and over again, you're pointing at an organismic view of existence we do not have language for.
Yeah.
When I hear you talk about this shift in view from the small self, which is either ideated as an entity, anything from I hate myself all the way to big sky mind. You're saying that that entityness, it's empty because what it actually is the essence of awareness, which inhabits everything. It's just manifesting itself in different forms.
Yes.
With why emptiness and form are the same. And yet, when you ask someone, like the example you used with this patient who has a part of themselves that wants to harm themselves, a part of themselves that doesn't buy into that agenda either, and then you say to them, well, how are you aware of either of those parts of yourself? And you're suggesting when you ask that question, they go beyond the problem and they experience the essence of whatever the mind might be coming up with as an entity. Entitylessness, there's no way it can be a self.
So the emptiness is the not separate selfness. It doesn't mean that there's not a human being here or a flower here. Even Shakyamuni Buddha never said whether there's a self or no self. So this has been a kind of a more hardline view of this no self that I think has been carried over. None of these words are any good, but it's interesting. Ordinary mind isn't just fast. It's like, oh, just here, ordinary.
This is how the organism experiences itself. It has no ego orientation to it. It has entityness, which has a very different feel than the things that most people experience about who they are, which continually trips them up.
The organism is released into its interconnection. I mean, I've asked questions like, so are you worried about dying? And they're like, what's dying? I'm not born. They don't know the word unborn. Well, what do you look out the window? I'm the same as the tree. The tree and I are a part of this unity. That's why I feel so relaxed, because I'm not a separate self, but I'm not no self. And because emptiness doesn't mean void.
I'm not going to nihilism. I usually use not self instead of no self. And trying to cure the problem that sometimes we get into, and I include myself in this, when things become so broken down and so dispersed, there's a way in which people can't actually ingest any of this, which in fact is why the movement in your book back to entityness is really important in all of this, because the whole thing needs to be grounded in existence. But as long as you are alive, all this recognition needs to inhabit aliveness. And aliveness means you're actually here in a world, in a body.
Yes, we're absolutely saying the same thing. I'm willing in this contemporary time to err a little bit on the side of entityness than nihilism. Some of the more Buddhist groups who have literally shut their emotions down and feel like there's no self and there's just, what kind of tea would you like? All tea is the same. And then some of the non-dual community that we know that has its home in California and England, it's like, I'm pure awareness. That's who I am. I'm just the awareness. So a lot of what I do is kind of reverse engineer, fill in the gaps of practice, use as ordinary language as possible and explain why, and then get a feel for it, and then let people use any language you want.
So my patients use freedom. It just feels free.
Yeah.
When I ask them free, Of what? What they usually say to me is free of all the distress I'm continually causing myself. And you and I both know that level of distress is all about concept.
That's right. That's the no self. And then what about the kuntazangpo, which means
Exactly.
the all good qualities start coming in. It's not only the absence in no self, there's these positive qualities. They're literally the fabric of being. The Brahma Viharas, that translation of loving kindness, equanimity, compassion, and sympathetic joy, those are the structures of human consciousness. Non-fear, non-worry, non-shame. The joy can be with the pain. It doesn't stop it from happening. It just allows for a full human expression.
And that is the experience you had in college when you hit the wall of not feeling the grief, went beyond the not feeling and opened into, oh, I have all this room to embrace the grief from this unbounded, open-hearted awareness.
Yes. I'm advocating that this is accessible, that it's the next stage of human evolution or development that is possible, learnable. These small glimpses, many times, this approach immediately shifting out of the small self through the gap into the awake awareness, which is embodied. I've never had anybody get overwhelmed, flooded by the unconscious. They'll have parts come up that are like, oh my God, what's happening? You're going out of your mind. Okay, from the new operating system, how do you feel toward that part that's feeling panic or shame or worry? Feel love. This is a part of me that I've wondered where it went. That's the new capacity inwardly and outwardly. And then that's where compassionate activity starts to come from.
I also think that doing this in the midst of distress, because the capacity to recognize the occurrence itself is so gracious. The feeling of it is so completely embracing. It's just with it. It's a way to be able to rest in a state which normally would be so overwhelming that there's no capacity for rest in a state like that. Ultimately, these skills that you've laid out, they're for some kind of larger, greater recognition of who we are. It's a beautiful platform for being able to work with people who normally our field considers unworkable.
Yes, because it's ultimately, awakening is about reducing suffering. Emotional suffering, mental suffering. I even have a chapter about using this unique, having awareness be like the operator that receives a pain signal, a physical pain signal, and literally goes down into the area that pain is happening and then opens to the field of awareness and is remarkable for helping people with chronic or severe physical pain. Once you discover this new dimension of consciousness that's just ground, then you can navigate it. We were talking about local awareness. So this is a way to have you feel like you can disidentify or unhook awareness from thinking, and then have it literally move down to be aware of your jaw from your jaw, and then aware of your throat from your throat, and then drop below your neck, and then move into a safe heart mind or heart space. So you start to be aware of your heart mind from your heart mind, and almost like you're seeing through the eyes of the heart. It decenters the self and the looker and even the mindful meditator, and shows that the whole field is actually aware, and you can be aware from anywhere. You don't have to orient to thought to feel directly aware of your jaw from your jaw or your throat from your throat. That the intelligence is like a bubble of invisible knowing, just starting by feeling kind of where you're listening to me from, feeling a sense of focuser. You could even notice that you might be the place that you would focus on your breath from is the same place you're listening to this instruction from. But then who I'm talking to is actually the awareness. So I'm not asking you, the doer, or you, the meditator, to unhook awareness. I'm actually asking awareness itself to simply feel like it's identified or attached, and then feel as if this knowing can just simply step back. And then feel as if that awareness can drop and feel your jaw and your smile directly from your jaw. And then feel as if awareness moves itself. It just slowly drops to become aware of your throat from within your throat. Feeling that it isn't stretching attention down, that it's feeling the space, the aliveness, and the awareness directly from within your throat. And then curiously feel as if awareness can move itself and drop below your neck. And then drop down to the middle of your torso, feeling the aliveness, awareness, and space, till you find a kind of safe, open space or a heart mind that isn't a place that's too tight. It feels open, like home. And just notice that you don't have to go up to thought to feel directly and know from within. Just feel as if you're knowing your heart space from your heart space. And then just notice that you might be feeling and knowing from your heart mind as if that's the new centerless center that connects to the boundless heart, the spacious mind that's touching and knowing. So just curiously in your heart mind, see what it feels like if your phone number arises to your heart space. And then let it go. Notice that you don't have to associate, to just be. And just let all your senses come to this heart mind, from hearing to smelling to tasting to this open door that opens in front of you to connect, is already connected with everyone and everything. And this heart door that opens behind you, so you feel like awareness has your back. Feeling connected to this source and field of the nature of mind that is alert and clear and connected. Feel this ground of being, what it's like to be. And then you can just have all your senses be equal. So even if you're opening your eyes, let them be soft and equal rights for all senses. So don't let your eyes and your thinking predominate. Feel the openness and interconnectedness.
That ultimately is embodied awareness, locating the true source. It's always a simultaneous, localized experience as well as opening out simultaneously.
So that becomes one of the key differences, again, between deliberate and effortless, is that you're equally aware of inside and outside simultaneously.
Though I am sure there are many people who would be very upset to hear me say this, it is much less painful because there isn't the direct insult and attack to the supremacy of the ego. The supremacy just naturally falls away because it's a distortion and it doesn't actually have anything to do with one of my patients calls affectionately the real. Which I love. And it's true, distortion and delusion really doesn't have much ground to latch onto.
Yeah, and you can feel it's not just the absence of the primacy of the ego, it's the new operating system, right? In other words, that you can now talk from here, you can walk from here, you could say nothing and be quiet, but you don't lose anything by talking or even standing up or saying, oh, what am I going to have for dinner or something like that, because the thoughts and movement is made of this ocean of awareness. There's both inside and out.
As Minja Rinpoche likes to say, the ocean and the wave.
That's right.
No difference. The wave
Yeah,
is made up of the ocean.
that's right.
It just looks different. It's such a powerfully integrative method that you've come up with here.
Hmm.
And when I say come up with, I know we both know there's so much wisdom to have preceded. On the other hand, I do think that there's something very special about the way you have reimagined all of this in such a practical manner.
Really with the second book, I'm starting this new phase of hopefully getting it out.
So I'm imagining that this taste has enticed some of the clinicians in my listening audience to
Yeah.
maybe do some of this work with you. So why don't you tell people how they can do that?
Most everything is on my website. I've been traveling and teaching, and I do weekend and week-long workshops. So the website is lochkelly.org, LOCHKELLY.org. And I have events, and I have free YouTubes and audios. Then there's conferences, workshops, and things to read. And my book being the primary one. Sometimes I suggest that people read the written glimpse practices in their own voice into your recorder so you can be led, whether it's by me or by yourself, because that's really the only way. You couldn't really get it by reading, but the practices are experiential.
Well, I'm really looking forward to whatever you and Judd do together. I think this is a very good research method because it's something that can be reproducible. I really look forward to whatever comes out of that.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that'll be fun. There's a lot of exciting little projects.
So before we finish, is there anything else you want people to know?
Just to be encouraging to say that having seen this be effective with people of all sorts of backgrounds, to give a sense that this is relief of suffering on this level that comes from ancient wisdom traditions into modern neuroscience and psychology is available, that awakening is possible, that it's not an esoteric thing. I encourage everyone to find their heart's desire to really find your way home.
I second the motion.
Okay.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful experience for me, and I'm sure all the listeners will get so much out of this episode.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa. Great talking to you. Hopefully we'll talk more soon.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To get in touch, please visit groundlessground.com. Let's dedicate our efforts to the healing of our planet and all its inhabitants. See you next time on the Groundless Ground.